Mercedes found a grey area in the 2026 engine regulations, and their rivals are furious about it. The FIA explicitly confirmed the power unit is legal, but Ferrari, Honda, and Audi submitted a joint letter demanding clarification because they believe Mercedes will run a different engine on track than the one that passes inspection in the garage. An engine can be legal in static tests, but potentially non-compliant at racing temperatures, and this might give Mercedes the same kind of advantage they enjoyed back in 2014. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what Mercedes pulled off and why it matters. Here is what is actually happening with these 2026 power units. A reduced compression ratio limit of 16:1 now applies under the new regulations, down from 18:1 in the current engines. Article C 5.4.3 contains the rule, and the detail that matters most is that measurements are executed at ambient temperature. Mercedes reportedly built engine components from materials that expand when the engine reaches operating temperatures around 120 degrees Celsius, and at that point the compression ratio approaches 18:1. But when the FIA measures the engine in the garage at ambient temperature, it reads 16:1 and passes every single test. Former Jordan technical director Gary Anderson explained the physics. He said that with an 80mm piston diameter as stipulated in the regulations, just half a millimeter of thermal expansion shifts the compression ratio from 16:1 up to 18:1. The performance gain sits around 10 kilowatts, which translates to approximately 13 horsepower. That number might sound modest, but in Formula One terms it means roughly 3 to 4 tenths of a second per lap, depending on the circuit characteristics. The FIA issued a clear statement confirming that Mercedes broke no rules, and their official position lays it out plainly. Their statement explains that the regulations clearly define the maximum compression ratio and the method for measuring it, which relies on static conditions at ambient temperature. The procedure remained unchanged despite the reduction in the permitted ratio for 2026, and that is the position they are standing on. What the FIA is saying amounts to this. They wrote the rules, they know how compliance gets measured, and Mercedes passes those measurements. Rival teams point to a different section of the regulations. Article C 1.5 states that Formula One cars must comply with these regulations in their entirety at all times during a competition, and they argue this means the 16:1 compression limit should apply even when engines run hot on track, rather than just during cold garage inspections. That dispute sits at the heart of everything. Compliance gets determined either by how you measure the car or by how the car actually performs, and those two things apparently are not the same. Ferrari, Audi, and Honda, who supply engines to Aston Martin, submitted a joint letter to the FIA in December 2025 demanding clarification on this exact issue. All 5 2026 power unit manufacturers were scheduled for an extraordinary technical meeting with the FIA. Ferrari team principal Fred Vasseur offered a measured public response when asked about the situation. Teams have grown up massively, according to Vasseur, and more people now work specifically on finding loopholes. But he also acknowledged that the FIA faces a huge challenge preventing someone from exploiting gaps in the regulations. Vasseur then drew a comparison that tells you everything about the stakes involved. Back in 2009, nobody guessed that Brawn GP would show up 4 tenths ahead of everyone else with its double diffuser, and they came out of nowhere. This time around, with the 2026 rule change being even bigger, Vasseur believes the potential for surprises runs even greater. Gary Anderson provided what might be the most honest assessment anyone in the technical community has offered. This sort of thing exists for everyone to exploit as best they see fit, according to Anderson, and in his view, it does not qualify as cheating. Pushing the limits to the maximum is exactly what teams should do. But he added a reality check. If you fail to spot that opportunity, then as always happens in Formula One, it is time to cry wolf. Something separates this controversy from others in Formula One history, and it matters. Mercedes didn't try to sneak anything past the FIA, according to reporting from the race. The team stayed in dialogue with the FIA throughout the rules process, and there was no element of hiding what they were doing. Reassurance that their interpretation was compliant came before they fully committed to the design philosophy. Technical director James Allison called the 2026 power unit regulations a complete tear-up when describing the changes involved. The V6 looks very much the same on the outside, but there is less fuel flow, a defined compression ratio that is lower than before, boost limits, and variable trumpets got removed entirely. Toto Wolff stayed characteristically cautious about making predictions when asked about their competitive position. The moment you think you've aced it, you're going to get caught out massively, according to Wolff, and he admitted he doesn't know where Mercedes truly stands relative to other teams. But here is the telling detail that everyone noticed. James Allison hinted that the team's confidence level sits pretty similar to where it was in 2014. That was the year Mercedes dominated the start of the turbo hybrid era and went on to claim 7 consecutive Constructors' Championships. Mercedes has a documented history of finding interpretations that rivals completely missed, and the pattern repeats itself. The DAS system from 2020 allowed drivers to adjust front-wheel toe angle by pushing and pulling the steering wheel, which nobody had ever seen before. Red Bull protested at the Austrian Grand Prix, and on July 4th, the stewards ruled it legal, finding DAS to be a legitimate part of the steering system. The FIA banned it from 2021 onward, but Mercedes got a full season of advantage. James Allison said something back then that sounds remarkably familiar today. The development was not news to the FIA, according to Allison, because Mercedes had been talking to them about it for some time. The rules were pretty clear about what is permitted, and Mercedes felt confident it matched those requirements. That is almost word for word what is happening now with the compression ratio interpretation. The 2014 split-turbo layout deserves mention too. Mercedes placed the compressor at the front and the turbine at the rear of the engine in a configuration that was perfectly legal, but technically brilliant. That architectural choice contributed to their dominant hybrid-era success that lasted years. The pattern stays consistent across all these examples. Mercedes identifies grey areas, works with the FIA to confirm compliance, exploits the advantage within the rules, and then watches as the FIA closes the loophole for future seasons. This compression ratio controversy exists within the largest regulation overhaul in Formula One history, and that context matters. Power output splits 50-50 between electrical and internal combustion under the 2026 rules. The MG UK output jumps from 120 kilowatts to 350 kilowatts, which represents a massive increase. The MG UH gets eliminated entirely, a decision made specifically to attract new manufacturers like Audi. 100% sustainable fuel replaces the current blend. Cars drop around 30 kilograms in weight while running shorter wheelbases and narrower bodies. Active aerodynamics replaces DRS with new modes for straights and corners. Fred Vasseur acknowledged the complexity when discussing the variables involved. Even if someone gains half a second by making better use of the tyres or exploiting a chassis loophole, compensating for that with a better engine proves difficult. The number of variables facing teams in 2026 reaches levels nobody has dealt with before. Several paths exist for how this controversy could be resolved. The FIA might maintain the status quo, which would mean Mercedes and Red Bull race with their current designs, while rivals accept the disadvantage and work to close the gap over time. A formal protest at the Australian Grand Prix in early March represents another possibility. That scenario puts the stewards in a position to rule on the matter, and the decision could affect 12 of the 22 cars on the grid, since both Mercedes-powered and Red Bull-powered teams reportedly use similar approaches. Reports suggest the FIA may already be considering a compromise where they allow the system for 2026 only, with teams committing to abandon it for 2027. A safety valve also exists within the regulations themselves. The additional development upgrade opportunities system allows manufacturers who fall 2 to 4% behind the best power unit after the Miami Grand Prix to receive 1 additional upgrade, while those more than 4% behind can receive 2 upgrades. Performance estimates suggest Mercedes-powered teams, including Mercedes themselves plus McLaren, Williams, and potentially Alpine, would hold a substantial advantage at the start of a new regulatory era. History shows that teams who start strong in new regulations tend to dominate for years afterward. This situation captures what Formula One has always been at its core. The line between finding an advantage and gaining an unfair one gets debated constantly. Mercedes found a grey area, worked transparently with regulators, and exploited physics within the letter of the law. Rivals who missed the same opportunity now argue the spirit of the law suffered a violation. Whether this proves as decisive as the 2014 split turbo or becomes just another footnote in Formula One history will not become clear until cars hit the track at Barcelona, testing in late January. One thing remains certain though, this isn't cheating. This is Formula One doing exactly what Formula One has always done, which is pushing engineering to the absolute limit and leaving rivals wondering how they missed it.